list, yes, bury me with it. And if I'm cremated, burn it with me. Burn it with me. Say it with me now. Burn it with me. Hello there. I'm Look Hippie. And to end out Bookmas this year, I am going to be talking about all the books that I would like to be buried with. Now, hopefully we don't have to worry about this anytime soon, but I saw this in one video. I didn't even know that this was a thing, like bury me with these books, but I thought like, wow, that's perfect because there is a pretty large stack of books that, if possible, I would love to be buried with, and to take it a step further, that if it was at all possible, I could take them into the next life with me because I love them that much in this life. Let's just start with the first one here. I've talked about this book several times on my channel. I love this book. I have loved this book for years on end now. Some part of me will probably always love this book. This book was the first one that ever helped me realize that I enjoy character-driven books more than plot-driven books. And that is going to be Pet Sematary by Mr. Stephen King, none other than one of the greatest storytellers to ever live himself, Stephen E. King. I think his middle name starts with an E. I think it's Edwin. I think. So Mr. Stephen E. King. I love this book. The characters are so real. And this is the first book where I ever felt like the characters were my actual friends. And that's all of the characters, not just the main characters, all of them. So, Pet Cemetery, bury me with this book. I don't know, put it like beside me or something. Like if you could just line my casket with these books, that would be lovely. Lovely. If my house was on fire, these are the books that I would save. Okay? Okay. So next, we have a book that I read, I think 2 years ago. And when I read this, it just was like, wow, wow, wowie. This is why I read. What the heck? And that book is going to be Letters to a Young Poet by Rainer Maria Rilke. Oh my days. When I read this book, it blew my mind. I read it in one sitting and I was like, immediate 5 star, immediate 10 star. Like, are you kidding me? This was just so beautiful, so profound, so soulful. I just, I ate it up. I absolutely loved it. And to this day, I still think this is one of the most beautiful books I've ever read, or beautiful novelettes or novellas that I've ever in my life, or short stories, whatever you want to call it, I've ever read. So, Letters to a Young Poet. Bury me with this book, okay? Next is one of the first classics. I think this is the first classic I ever read, undid, on my own, just for enjoyment. And I fell in love with it. I wasn't tracking my reading yet. I was just reading just to do it. I wasn't making YouTube videos or anything like that when I read this book, but I fell in love with it. I fell in love with the monster, and I had a lot of empathy for him. And I just love this book so much. I have several videos on my channel about this book as well, and that's going to be Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. You'll never ever get me to shut up about this book. This book is on my favorite of all times list. Yes, bury me with it. And if I'm cremated, burn it with me. Burn it with me. Say it with me now. Burn it with me. Next, we have a book that I read this year. Also, a lot of these books are books that I read this year, by the way. This year was a great reading month, and either towards the end of December or at the very beginning of January, I will be doing a different kind of wrap up. I'm only going to be wrapping up the books that I read physically, and I have a shelf where all of the books that I read this year are, or where they reside, and so I'll be going through that, and a lot of these books will be on there. But another book that I want to be buried with is How to Die by Seneca. This was really good. There was a chunk of it in the middle where I was like, that's intense. But I really enjoyed this book, and I think I rated it 5 stars. Like, yeah. And this is philosophy, so nonfiction, philosophy, that kind of thing. I really, really like Stoic philosophy. I think it's a very valuable school of thought. So I will be reading more Stoic philosophy and more from Seneca, hopefully, in the coming year. Next is another book that I read this year, and I just loved it so, so much. Game of Thrones, George R. R. Martin. I am reading Clash of Kings right now. I don't know if I'm going to finish it this year because my main priority is finishing another book that's on this list, and we'll talk about that soon. That's my main priority. And also, I probably won't do a wrap up at the end of December because I've only read one book, and Yeah, and I'm making 3 videos about it and probably a fourth. So, and that's probably going to serve as my wrap up. But Game of Thrones, bear me with this book. This book was so good. One of the most profound things I have ever heard was written or ever read was written in this book. One of the many one of the most profound things I've ever read written that wasn't inspired by the Holy Ghost was written in this book. And I believe it's something like Bran asked Eddard or Ed Stark, like, can a man be brave if he is afraid? And Eddard's, and okay, Ned Stark, yes. And Ned's answer was, that's the only time a man can be brave. And I was like, yeah, I love that. Love that. Knew I was going to have a good time with this book when I got that, like 20 pages in. Game of Thrones, bury me with this book. First ever video on this YouTube channel was about this book. I'm sure I will make many more videos about this book. I love this book. It's one of my favorite books, but I do think it's been demoted, sadly. Can we just like have a moment of silence for this book? 1 second. Yeah, that's Moby Dick. This book, I loved this book with all my heart and soul. I still do. But she's been bested. Bestie has been bested by a book we're going to talk about in a few minutes. But still, bury me with this book, okay? I've talked about this book enough. I don't need to yap continually because you already know. Well, if you've been here from the beginning, you already know how I feel about this book. So, if you don't know how I feel about this book, go scroll down my page and watch any of the Moby Dick videos I have up. There are like 4 of them, I think. So, do that, please. The other one is Animal Farm by George Orwell. I love this book with all of my heart and soul. This was a 10-star read. This book, dude. I love this book more than I love 1984. Everybody talks about 1984, but what about Animal Farm? What about Animal Farm? It's concise, it's compact, and so full of information and so full of just inherent truths that I just love this book. So, Animal Farm, bury me with it. And here is the book that dethroned Moby Dick as my favorite work of fiction of all time. I love this book. I'm currently reading this book, and it has been said that Stephen King is my favorite author. Maybe, yes, he is my favorite living author, but I think living or dead, my favorite author is going to have to go to Fyodor Dostoevsky. And bury me with this book. I'm not even kidding. If I had to choose one book to be buried with, it'd be this. Bury Me with Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. I adore this book. Words, I do not have the words to describe how I feel about this book. I don't. Like, I think that Raskolnikov is the most complicated, complex, gray, morally gray character I've ever read in my life, and I just love him to death. I love this book to death. I love Dostoevsky's brain to death. If there was any person, dead or alive, that I could have at least one conversation with before I die, it would be Fyodor Dostoevsky. So, there you go. Another book by Fyodor Dostoevsky. It's going to be The Idiot. I read this book earlier this year and it stuck with me even until now. I love this book. I picked this book up because it felt very personal to me. I had read a few Fyodor Dostoevsky quotes and I just fell in love with him and I thought, wow. And then I found out that Pinchmushkin in this book had epilepsy, and that is something that is that is a condition that is very near and dear to my heart because my brother had epilepsy, and I and when I was reading this, I just thought of him all the time. And whenever I think about this book, I think of him. And so it has a very special place in my heart. I love this book. And yeah, bury me with this book. Okay. Bury me with it. Okay. If you want to get into reading classics, I would say start with John Steinbeck. Number one, because he's an American author and these books aren't that old. And so the language isn't that much different from how we speak today, but it's still so profound. And the language in which he speaks is very, very, very accessible, or the language in which he writes is very, very, very accessible. And, anybody could read it, I believe. Anybody with halfway decent reading comp skills can read this book, and that's what I love about it. And that doesn't make it any less profound than it is. And the length of it doesn't make it any less profound than it is. I love this book. I really enjoyed it. Bury me with it. My favorite Sarah J. Maas book that I have ever read, and that's going to be Tower of Dawn. I like Tower of Dawn does not get a lot of love, and I just really don't know why. I think Sarah J. Maas just shined in this book. I think she did all the things that she does well as a writer. She did in this book, and she excelled at them. At least to me, that's my opinion. And a few honorable mentions, or an honorable mention on this list, is going to be every single book in the Harry Potter series. If you've been here, you know I love Harry Potter. I talk about Harry Potter all the time. And at this point, I don't think there's any more room in my casket for the Harry Potter series. That's why it's an honorable mention. But if they've got like a 3XL casket, put me in there and shove all these books in there and bury me with them. Okay? Okay. That's going to bring us to the end of the video. I hope you have a good day. I hope you have a good evening. And most importantly, I hope you read a good book. And I'll see you when I see you. Bye.